Let's kick off this explainer by looking at a pretty incredible irony in the AI race. Think about this for a second. Google actually invented the core tech that makes modern AI possible. They published the foundational Transformer paper back in 2017. But it was OpenAI who took that architecture and brought it to the masses. And then, kind of waiting in the wings, Microsoft swooped in and effectively bought the distribution rights. It's just a wild dynamic, and it perfectly sets the stage for what we're going to dig into today.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to break down this trillion-dollar war, map out the major players, look at the open source wildcard, dive into Google's massive dilemma, ask if anyone actually has a moat, and finally, figure out who might win the future.
All right, part one, the trillion-dollar AI war. We are literally witnessing the most expensive competitive battle in the history of tech.
Hundreds of billions of dollars are flying around, and honestly, nobody really knows who's going to win. The tension between these two giants perfectly illustrates why. On one hand, you've got Google, the brilliant inventor. They literally wrote the paper on this stuff, yet they've spent years playing catch-up with their own creation. On the other hand, you've got Microsoft, a company that, let's be real, was kind of lagging in consumer tech for a decade. But man, almost overnight, they snagged the absolute best spot on the board.
And how exactly did Microsoft pull that off? Well, they wrote a massive $13 billion check to OpenAI. That single monumental move completely set the financial stakes for this entire competition. It basically forced every other major tech giant to scramble and totally rethink their game plans.
Let's move into part two and map out these AI players. Because as we're seeing, having the best tech absolutely doesn't mean you automatically have the best business strategy.
Let's run through a quick dossier of who's who. OpenAI obviously has the massive first-mover advantage. 339 million monthly users on ChatGPT is insane. Then you've got Anthropic pitching Claude as this hyper-safe, enterprise-grade alternative. They're basically selling trust. Perplexity is out there trying to completely kill traditional search by acting as an answer engine. And you've even got players like Elon Musk's xAI banking on a real-time data advantage from X to carve out their own slice of the pie.
But look, wearing the crown is tough. Despite OpenAI's massive scale, their vulnerabilities are very real. They're reportedly bleeding like $5 billion a year because the compute costs to run these models are just astronomical. To stay afloat, they lean heavily on Microsoft. And they're making some wild pivots too. Like, they recently dropped $6.5 billion on a hardware startup called IZO, which is founded by former Apple designer Johnny Ive. It shows they're desperately trying to break out of just software and secure an actual hardware platform.
Microsoft's approach, though, it's arguably so much safer. They don't actually need to win the underlying model race. They just need to be the distribution layer. By baking OpenAI's tech right into Office 365 with Copilot, they are forcing AI into products that 400 million people are already using every single day. And every time a developer taps into this, Microsoft's Azure cloud revenue ticks up. It is literally a masterclass in distribution.
Now, for part three, the open source wildcard. Because while everyone else is busy building walled gardens, Meta is doing the exact opposite.
Instead of charging people to use their Llama models, Meta just made them free, open source. At first glance, this looks like they're just setting billions of dollars on fire. But Mark Zuckerberg has been pretty clear. They are playing a totally different game. By giving the tools away for free, they're taking a short-term hit to ensure the entire industry standardizes around their architecture.
And you know what? This open source strategy is already actively shaping the battlefield. Take DeepSeek, a Chinese startup. They took open research, including Meta's own PyTorch and Llama, and built a model so wildly efficient that it actually briefly bumped ChatGPT out of the #1 spot on the App Store. When you open source your tech, you're essentially letting the entire world build your ecosystem for you.
Which brings us to part four, the Google search dilemma. Talk about an absolute existential crisis. Google is arguably the most technically capable player in the room, but they are incredibly structurally conflicted. On one hand, they have massive strengths, deep mind, world-class researchers, endless user data. But on the other hand, they have a serious problem. Every time you do a traditional search, Google makes about 1.61 cents through their highly optimized ad network. If they suddenly pivot to an AI chatbot that just hands you the answer without a page full of clickable ads, well, they directly threaten their own massive cash cow.
The real kicker here is the underlying unit economics. Firing off a generative AI response adds an estimated 0.356 cents in what are called inference costs. Now, I know a fraction of a cent sounds like absolutely nothing, but when you are processing over 5 trillion searches a year like Google does, that tiny little fraction becomes completely catastrophic to your profit margins.
All right, part 5,
Does anyone actually have a moat? Because with costs running this hot and everyone basically matching each other's tech week by week, we really need to ask the biggest strategic question of this whole explainer.
Does anyone actually have a durable competitive advantage? Think about it. If this tech is equally accessible to everybody and the models just become commodities, the underlying economics for most of these multi-billion-dollar companies are going to completely collapse.
Right now, one attempted moat is just the sheer cost of admission, which has absolutely exploded. Training the original Transformer back in 2017 cost around $900. Fast forward to Gemini 1.0 Ultra in 2024, you are looking at $191 million just to train one foundational model.
And what's driving those insane costs? The physical hardware. To build modern AI, you need thousands of specialized, incredibly electricity-hungry chips, like Google's tensor processing units, running parallel calculations for months on end. So for the moment, the moat is basically just massive piles of cash and massive compute power.
Another potential moat people talk about is data. The idea is that companies with proprietary data, like Google with YouTube or OpenAI with their exclusive Reddit deal, will naturally build smarter models. But there's a strong counterargument called fishing out. Basically, the freely available text on the public internet has largely already been consumed and processed. The well is running dry.
It's wild how heavily early models relied on the open web. 60% of GPT-3's training data came from Common Crawl, which is essentially just a massive scrape of the public internet. As that open data gets exhausted, companies are scrambling. They're often forced to look at highly expensive, AI-generated synthetic data just to keep the improvements coming.
Which brings us to our final section. Who wins the future? If models are getting insanely expensive to build, the data is running out, and everyone is just copying everyone else, where does the value actually go?
Well, Microsoft's CEO, Satya Nadella, put it pretty bluntly. He said generative AI is becoming a commodity. Just think about the implications of that for a second. The CEO of Microsoft is flat out acknowledging that the core intelligence layer, the actual AI brains, might not be where the real money is made in the long run.
The real winner is probably going to be the one who owns the ecosystem. It's all about owning the platform where the innovation actually happens. This is exactly why Meta is giving their models away for free to become the industry standard. And it's why Microsoft is perfectly happy to let OpenAI burn through billions while Microsoft locks down the enterprise distribution network. They don't just want to build the smartest bot, they want to be the platform everyone else relies on.
So, I'll leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. When the dust finally settles on the most expensive technological war in human history, will the ultimate winners be the brilliant scientists who invented the tech, or the savvy strategists who figured out exactly how to distribute it? It's a fascinating question, and the answer is absolutely going to shape the next decade of our digital lives. Thanks for diving into this explainer with me.